We're going to take you to the UN General Assembly now, where the Palestinian Ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, is addressing the Assembly there.
Nicaragua and Namibia for remaining at the forefront of the international community's efforts, address the plight of the Palestinian people to enable the realization of their inalienable rights, including to self-determination and freedom, and to bring an end to the grave and historic injustice they have borne for over 75 years since the start of the Nakba, an ongoing and searing Nakba that we have painfully witnessed in the dark days of these past weeks and across the decades. We are grateful to Ambassador Ahmed Faisal Mohammed, Vice Chair, for presenting the committee's annual report to the General Assembly, reflecting on the committee's many efforts over the past year and its appeals to the international community as we gather once again in this Assembly to address the question of Palestine, to take stock of where we are today and where we are going, as the United Nations carries forth in its permanent responsibility towards the question of Palestine until it is justly resolved in all its aspects in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. Mr. President, the UN Charter starts with this line: we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. I often repeat this line in many of my statements. Not a single Palestinian generation has been saved from the scourge of war. Every single one has witnessed and endured horrors in its flesh. An entire nation, over decades, has faced dispossession, displacement, denial of rights, destruction and death. Maybe since the 1948 generation, this generation is the one that has suffered most painfully and traumatically. This is the deadliest period ever endured by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and they have witnessed many previous assaults. This is the largest forced displacement of Palestinians since the Nakba. This destruction is apocalyptic and the humanitarian crisis catastrophic. There are no laws, no morals, no principles in this world that can justify this abhorrent, inhumane reality. It is one that shakes humans' conscience and demands global action for justice. Mr. President, the massacres against our people in Gaza have mobilized peoples and nations all around the world, speaking out against injustice and calling for justice, calling for a ceasefire now in Gaza. I repeat, calling for a ceasefire now in Gaza, calling for an end to the Israeli occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people, calling for a free Palestine. The General Assembly was the first UN body to reflect this global outrage and to take a clear and unequivocal stance for calling for an immediate, durable, and sustained humanitarian truce leading to a cessation of hostilities. I must add, the Secretary General called for a humanitarian ceasefire now, and the President of the General Assembly few minutes ago in his statement repeated the same idea. The Assembly convened in an emergency special session and took this courageous step over 1 month ago. 2/3 of the UN membership voted in favor of this resolution. Had it been implemented then, thousands of Palestinian lives would have been spared and families would not have endured such agony and anguish. In adopting this resolution, the General Assembly was guided by the imperatives of legality, morality, and humanity, and it proved also to be correct politically. It took the Security Council several more deadly and devastating weeks to finally act on a less ambitious resolution, but driven by several of the same humanitarian considerations addressed by the General Assembly. As the Assembly's resolution had foreseen, only a truce could allow sincere efforts to begin to address the humanitarian catastrophe being inflicted by Israel, the occupying power, in Gaza. Only a truce could lead to the release of people held in captivity and avoid further regional escalation. This truce must turn into a permanent ceasefire. The massacres of Palestinian children, women, and men cannot resume, should not resume. You should not allow it to resume. The human conscience cannot bear it. International law, including humanitarian and human rights law, prohibits it. International law, but also the norms of humanity, demand that we act to stop this war against innocent civilians and save human lives, that we act for humanitarian aid and access throughout the Gaza Strip, the return of those displaced without delay, the end of the siege and blockade, and that we act for accountability. Nothing can ever justify war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Mr. President, as more and more images of the devastation in Gaza reaches the world, each one of us has a choice to make, either for protection of civilians or their slaughter, either for the rule of international law or indiscriminate vengeance, either for the prospect of peace or perpetual conflict. Virtually every nation represented here has decided, some sooner other than later, to join the right side of history. Now we need to stand united in putting an end to this madness and charting a way forward for a more just, peaceful, stable future. Mr. President, 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, including more than 6,000 children and 4,000 women. More than 30,000 people have been wounded, with many suffering amputations and burns, enduring their injuries and pain without medical care and with nowhere safe to heal and recover. Over 1.8 million civilians in Gaza, or nearly 80% of the population, are estimated to be internally displaced. The majority of them refugees, displaced for the second, third, or fourth times in their lives. Of them, nearly 1.1 million are sheltering in 156 UNRWA facilities across Gaza, bearing indignities that no human should be forced to bear, and still not protected even under the UN flag. Even that is not respected by the occupying power, as it deliberately strikes at homes, schools, hospitals, and UN shelters with barbaric and punitive violence, intent on destroying the basis of human life in Gaza, intent on terrorizing and traumatizing everyone. The sheer magnitude of the killing and maiming, of the destruction and forced displacement is testimony to how indiscriminate this war is, and goes to show that its primary targets and victims are actually the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. No conflict in recent memory has seen so many children killed at this pace, civilians killed at this pace, journalists killed at this pace, UN staff killed at this pace, humanitarian and medical personnel killed at this pace. This is a full-fledged war against Palestine and its people. This is reconfirmed by what we are witnessing in the West Bank, with over 230 Palestinians killed and thousands have been injured in the span of 7 weeks at the hands of Israeli occupation forces and settlers, added to the more than 180 Palestinians killed prior to October. In total, among them, 107 children. This is the deadliest period virtually ever witnessed in the West Bank. Over 1,200 Palestinians have been displaced over the same 7 weeks period, added to the more than 1,000 forcibly displaced earlier this year, as Israel carries on non-stop with its illegal settlement, colonization, and annexation of our land. More than 3,000 Palestinian civilians, including children, have been arrested and detained by incessant military raids by the Israeli occupying forces across the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in the same 7 weeks period, now bringing the number of prisoners to over 10,000 Palestinians held captive in Israeli jails, enduring inhumane conditions. The oppression and persecution, abuse and discrimination against our people continues unabated under this illegal Israeli colonial occupation and apartheid regime. It is the same logic at play everywhere. For the Israeli government, the priority is not security. It is the destruction of the Palestinian nation, of the very presence and existence of the Palestinian people on their land of Palestinian statehood. Even at the expense of security, through dispossession, displacement, denial of rights, and if all that is not enough, then through death, even their right to life is denied. You know how we know all this? Because Israeli leaders cannot get themselves to hide it anymore. They are telling you this every day, in every statement they make. In the words of one of them, Palestinians have 3 choices, and this one is a minister sitting in the cabinet of Prime Minister Netanyahu. The choices are surrender and subjugation, exodus, or death. 3 choices: surrender and subjugation, exodus, or death. And we reject these things because we are proud people and we are determined to live in our national homeland. Mr. President, this catastrophe demonstrated 2 things: that there is no peace in the Middle East without a just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine, in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions, and that Palestinian freedom, not further oppression and occupation, is the path to peace and security for all. Palestinian rights cannot continue to be subordinated, violated, or erased. They are inalienable, just like for all peoples. The right to self-determination, the right of our refugees to return, the right to life, the right to exist in dignity and peace and stability in our homeland, Palestine. Palestine cannot remain the exception to the rule of law and the enjoyment of human rights. All our efforts must be dedicated now to prevent further massacres and to ending the assault on the lives and existence of the Palestinian nation. But we must, in parallel, be preparing for an unprecedented, bold and collective effort to end colonization and occupation and apartheid and to achieve peace. The 2-state solution requires a strong, independent and sovereign Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Those who favor such a solution must take action against the colonial occupation that prevents and kills such a prospect and must recognize the state of Palestine, provide it with membership at the UN, and help it actualize its sovereignty on the ground. You have to act now. We have to become like you, a full member in the United Nations, to begin the process of the actualization of the 2-state solution after we end the occupation. It is your collective responsibility to allow us to accomplish that.
There is no peace in the Middle East without a solution to the Palestinian situation. The words of Riyad Mansour, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, speaking there at UN headquarters in New York, addressing the Assembly of Nations. A reminder, of course, of what's at stake for the people of Gaza and indeed the occupied West Bank, a call to make this temporary ceasefire permanent.